Hi, folks. Happy Wednesday, and welcome to Food for Thought. On this week's episode, we're speaking with Pat Turpin, co-founder of the iconic American chip brand Popchips. Rewinding the clock to 2007, Pat and his co-founder, Keith Belling, developed a novel potato chip product in California, growing it into a company that eclipsed $100 million in annual sales. In 2011, the company was rated among the top 20 promising companies by Forbes, evident of its strong brand power and market traction with over 30,000 points of sale. Pat navigated a successful exit to VMG Partners in recent years and is now a full-time board member, investor, and advisor to consumer packaged goods companies, including EnWave. Pat, where does Food for Thought find you today?
In my home in Manhattan Beach, California.
Very nice. So take us back to 2007 when you started Popchips with your business partner, Keith Belling. Where did it start and how did it all begin?
Sure. I was an executive with Costco and had left to start my own business. I had a thesis at the time that natural and organic foods were poised for huge growth and that there were certain product categories that were really ripe for small companies to innovate and succeed in. And one of those I thought was snacks, which was full of unhealthy products for the most part. And the few healthy products that were there tasted terrible. And if we could develop a healthy snack that was what I like to call mainstreamable with great taste, then I felt there was a lot of unmet demand that could be sold into. And I then met with my friend who I'd known for a number of years, Keith Belling, and shared my idea that she liked. And we embarked on a process together of finding a platform company to acquire that we could then, create this healthy snack platform with. And we ended up finding a small private label rice cake company, which doesn't sound very exciting, but we found the equipment that makes the rice cakes could make other more interesting things that weren't like anything on the market. And so we bought the company and then developed Popchips from there.
So how did you go about finding this puff rice cake co-packer in terms of, oftentimes when people start a CPG company, they're kind of tinkering around with things in a kitchen. This obviously wasn't the case. So you obviously had some good insight into what was going on in the market.
Yeah, I had been kind of scouting a number of emerging brands and manufacturers in the U.S. And from that and from some other similar scouting that my business partner Keith had been doing, we had kind of a short list of companies that we were looking at, and this was one of them.
So for those that haven't tried Popchips, can you explain how the product differs from a traditional potato chip or a rice cake product?
Sure. So I think the more relevant point of comparison is to a potato chip. So, a potato chip is, greasy and yummy, but full of fat from all the oil because it's fried. In the case of Popchips, we take potato pieces and starch and put it into the same kind of equipment that makes rice cakes, which essentially applies heat and pressure and ends up popping the chip. And so since it's popped as opposed to fried, it isn't full of oil. So you end up having a chip that is crispy and tasty, but isn't fried, and so it has half the fat and calories of a typical potato chip. So
Pat, I'm curious of, back in 2006, 2007, the natural health foods movement and market was much more in its infancy than now, where it's, almost becoming mainstream. What similarities or differences do you see now as a board member and an investor and advisor to CPG companies to when you were in founder mode back in 2007?
Probably the biggest point of difference is at the time, if we go back 15 years, there was very little what I'd call mainstream healthy snack competition. There just wasn't that much on the market. And today, the market's flooded with healthy snacks. So Popchips and a couple of others, kind of ushered in, this notion of better for you snacks that had mainstream appeal. And then lots of other people came into the market. So for a company operating in that space today, it's hyper competitive, whereas at the time, consumers had far less choices, and so there was a lot more white space. And generally speaking, when you're pioneering anything in the food industry, it's a lot easier to operate within white space than with a crowded competitive set.
Definitely. So I'm curious, as you went about scaling up Popchips, what was your experience like in terms of utilizing in-house manufacturing versus outsourced co-packers and co-manufacturers?
Sure. Each, in terms of in-house manufacturing versus using co-packers, each has pluses and minuses. We used a hybrid strategy of both owned and outsourced manufacturing. The value of in-house manufacturing is you control your own R&D destiny, and you can perfect and bring products to market faster than a co-packer. No one will ever care as much about your product as you, and so it's easier to push the quality envelope and the innovation envelope when you control the manufacturing assets than working with a co-packer. That said, owned capacity is obviously very expensive, and so we started with our own capacity from acquiring this rice cake manufacturer, but then as we grew, we added co-packers as we expanded, both in North America and in Europe. And I think it comes down to, how proprietary are the manufacturing assets versus how much are marketing and branding the differentiators in your space, given whatever space in the food and beverage market you're in.
So for viewers' context, Popchips is a company that you started from scratch and grew to somewhere around $100 million in annual sales, with, I think, over 30,000 points of sale. What was the most difficult hurdle to overcome when it came to getting widespread market penetration with national retailers?
Well, first and foremost, big retailers rarely pioneer new products anymore. They usually want to see market data showing your product succeeding in the rest of the market first before they bring you in. And that can take a long time, as in years, to sell into a lot of those other accounts and build a selling data story to be able to go in and show those big national retailers. But there are exceptions, and understanding what your brand can really do for that national retailer and how it aligns with their current initiatives is important. There's also things you can do like offering exclusives. So there's a number of tools you can employ, but you need to make sure you're ready to support it properly. It's great to get shelf placement in a big national retailer, but if you don't support it correctly with the right promotional and marketing support, such that the customer finds it and purchases it, you will be off the shelf in 6 to 12 months. But that's generally the biggest challenge with that.
There's an interesting anecdote floating around that you and your business partner didn't necessarily want to put 65% less fat right across the front of your bag because it may signal to the consumer that the product does not taste good. Instead, you developed a funky brand campaign to bring in customers with a more unconventional message and emphasis on flavor, which in turn made the health message a little more subtle. This obviously eventually paid off in spades for you, but surely it couldn't have seemed so obvious at the time. I'm curious, what that conversation was like and why you employed the strategy.
Well, the anecdote is true. When we looked at the competitive landscape in snacks, when we were launching, all the healthy items were pushing things like, a third less salt or half the fat and the front of the bag. And so the impression in your mind as a consumer was, well, it must also have half the taste. It must not taste very good. So in snacks, it's flavor first. And so we made the brand flavor forward and let the back of the bag talk about health. The whole idea is connect on flavor, let them try the product. The consumer, likes the taste, says, oh, this tastes really good, turns over the bag, and then has that moment of surprise and delight when they see, oh my gosh, this has half the fat and calories. Now I'm in love with it. And so when we did talk about health, we also used humor in a very conscious way to convey our messaging. And the reason that we decided to do that was because all these healthy food products were so serious in their messaging, right? But snacks is a very impulsive category. You don't plan out your snacking. It's very impulsive, and you don't want to think too hard about it. So humor was kind of a creative way to get our point across about certain product attributes in a way that was more approachable to people.
That's really interesting insight about snacking being impulsive and that, trying to resonate your brand with that. I've never thought of it that way. So thanks for sharing that. At what point did you know you had a real winner in your Popchips product? Was it early on? Did it take a lot of R&D? Was there a moment that you can specifically remember, or it was just, consistent small wins along the way?
Now, there was definitely a moment. When we first launched the brand, we launched in California, and we tinkered with a bunch of things, from customer channels to field marketing strategies, you name it. Some of it worked, some of it didn't work. Our next expansion was we went straight to New York City, and we employed what we thought was the right combination of things that we felt worked. And we found that it was successful pretty quickly. And at that point, we knew we had a replicatable formula that we could take to other markets and would work.
So as a company that has a product that becomes a home run, is R&D something you ever stop investing in and tinkering with the product and you get to a point where solely focused on commercialization? Or as part of the fabric of a CPG company, is it, do you think it's imperative that you're constantly looking on ways to improve your product?
Personally, I think it's imperative you're constantly looking at new ways to improve the product. So to answer your question, we never stopped R&D. And that's not just line extensions, new flavors. In our case, it was also tinkering and improving the base product. It's a continuous improvement process that really has to be a mindset. And the point is, you make little improvements, over time. And over a longer period of time, you move the goalpost a mile. So over time, our quality improved so much that after a couple of years, it was hard for others to match our quality. Because in the food business, you like to think, well, with enough time and money, anybody can copy anything. And with a few IP exceptions, that's generally true. But there's certain things that are learned when it comes to a new process. And there are certain minor continuous improvements you can make that, again, over time become additive and make it practically difficult for people to copy your product.
Mm-hmm. Looking back, what was the biggest pain point in Popchips evolution?
I'd say balancing out profitability with growth. Because when you're pioneering a new product category, there's pressure to build rapidly before others come along and copy you, and others who have more money, like bigger CPGs. But on the other hand, educating consumers is very expensive in terms of marketing. If you look at Palm Wonderful, they had this massive budget and put billboards about benefits of pomegranate juice all over. But, we didn't have hundreds of millions of dollars to market. So finding that balance between marketing to fuel growth and driving market share versus profitability was kind of an ongoing process that we were always kind of struggling with.
So not only did you create a brand and a product, you essentially established a whole new product category in CPG with Popchips. Is this something that, when you look back on the evolution of Popchips, you can really hang your hat on?
Well, the brand's been around for almost 15 years now, and it's one of the biggest healthy snack brands in the UK. So sure, you feel good about it anytime your brand can survive the test of time, particularly in a hyper-competitive category like snacks.
So fast forward to more recent years. In 2015, you successfully divested Popchips to VMG Partners led by Wayne Wu, who's a well-known investor in the CPG space. What was this M&A process actually like? I feel like amongst earlier stage entrepreneurs nowadays, they think there's this perception and glamour and speed in which these transactions take place. However, I don't know if that's actually consistent with, folks who have actually gone about a successful exit. Can you elaborate on your experience?
Sure. First, just to clarify, we actually had several transactions. Our first private equity investor was TSG Consumer, and they looked to exit their investment a number of years before you're referencing. And we worked really closely with Alex Panos of TSG. Alex is now at his own fund called Bookend Capital. And TSG held a minority of the company, but they had the right to sell. And none of the other investors wanted to sell. So we ended up doing a transaction where TSG sold their position to another private equity group, and the rest of us took some chips off the table, pun intended, but rolled the rest. And it was a later transaction than that sold to VMG. But to answer your question more directly of what it was like in terms of the process, I would say it's like having a second job, because you're filling diligence requests, you're negotiating a deal, and you're doing all these things while you're running the business, and painfully aware that you can't afford to take your eyes off the ball on the core business. So it's kind of like having a second job for a period of time.
So switching gears, you're now a full-time board member, advisor, and investor in CPG companies. What have you learned from the 35,000 foot view level that you wish you would have known while working in your business, whereas now you're largely speaking working on businesses? All
businesses have challenges and speed bumps, and some of them can be terrifying. When running a company, I think at times I was overly critical of ourselves on where we were with the state of the business. But having been involved now with dozens of companies in the space, I see it's really not about being perfect, because there's no such thing. And experienced investors will understand the business will have challenges at times. The issue is your true competitive advantage in your space and your brand health. If those things are there, you can work through lots of challenges. And if they're not there, then it doesn't matter how pretty the PowerPoint deck is and how pretty the packaging looks.
As an investor, what is a pitfall you see among early stage investors looking to raise seed rounds or Series ABC?
The biggest pitfall I tend to see is entrepreneurs who look at running an early stage round based on the timing of when they need cash versus planning capital raises around achieving certain milestones, the accomplishment of which will help successfully draw in outside capital. And the other is that they don't take time to develop relationships with logical investors far ahead of when they need to raise money. Meeting investors a year ahead of a capital raise, for example, is not even remotely too early, because it allows them to get to know you as the CEO or founder, see how your business progresses. Do you meet the objectives that you said that you're going to meet? Can they trust you? Those things take time to develop. And the fact that the investor is investing in the jockey as well as the horse. The horse is the business. The jockey is the leader of the business. And it takes time for them to get to know that. And so investing that time way in advance is something that I usually don't see entrepreneurs do, and it's very much advised.
So rewinding to the early days of Popchips, how did you manage bootstrapping versus taking on outside investment?
We had a business plan that involved, purchasing that rice cake business as our platform business and doing a proof of concept with this idea. We didn't name it Popchips yet, but with this new product launch. So we had an angel investor that co-invested with my partner and myself. But we knew that if our test of Popchips was successful, then that event would trigger the need for the next round of funding. And it was at that point that we sought out private equity money.
And do you think that a lot of investors now, entrepreneurs, that it's wise for them to bring on some of this smart capital from seasoned investors? A lot of time, folks don't necessarily come from an investment banking background like yourself, and might be a product expert or a chef, but they don't necessarily understand some of the higher level financial and economic decisions around a business. Do you think that's imperative, or do you think that companies should bootstrap as long as they can?
I think for that example of, like you said, an entrepreneur that's, say, a product person or something, and doesn't have the full set of experiences, I think the experience is important. But bringing out an outside investor isn't always something to rush and do, because when you bring in an outside investor, you add a level of complexity to your business. And so a lot of companies are able to bootstrap for a while, and when they can do that, it's oftentimes in their best interest to do so. Some companies can bootstrap more because they have very high margins, or they may be able to think through and build out their supply chain in a very cash thoughtful way, that gives them preferred payment terms to extend their cash. An example of that is a company called Food Should Taste Good, another chip brand. And the founder did something very smart. He basically built his supply chain based on suppliers that would give him extended terms well beyond kind of the norm in the industry. And that really allowed him to bootstrap the business and then go out and raise money when it made sense versus when he had to. And also give up less of the business as a result. So I think if you're creative about your capital and think through it up front, and not just think through your product and where you're going to sell it, you can plan around that. Unfortunately, people don't usually think about that. And the other thing I would kind of throw in is the earlier stage you are, the more difficult it is to raise capital. It's just a fact.
Mm-hmm. So your business partner, Keith Belling, is a serial entrepreneur, and like you, has continued to go on and build some great products and brands. Do you think it's imperative to have a business partner when starting a venture? And I'm curious for you, was it obvious that Keith would be your first business partner? And the reason I ask that question is, I talk to a lot of different founders, and some will say, that ultimately, like down the road, their business partner can be one of the biggest sources of friction for them, as opposed to the business, if there's not true alignment, or if they have maybe competing skill sets, as opposed to, one founder that focuses more on the technical and manufacturing side, and the other that focuses brand facing and sales. But sometimes if they have a similar skill set, there's clashing. I'm just curious, now, even when you're looking at companies coming to you and putting their deck in front of you, what do you make of how to go about finding the right business partner?
Well, to answer your first question, is it imperative to have a business partner? No, every situation is different. It can be extremely helpful. In my case, it was extremely helpful, and it was great for our business. In my particular case, Keith was a great partner because he's a brilliant marketer and a great out-of-the-box thinker, and our skill sets were very complementary. They weren't redundant. So the two of us together were more powerful than each of us by ourselves. It allowed us to divide and conquer a lot, and helped us to ramp up much more quickly, particularly given the complexity of what we were trying to pull off. Because you got to remember, we still were managing this private label business. We were trying to convert all the manufacturing assets to make Popchips and create a brand and about 5 other things at once. So it helped a lot to divide and conquer. So to answer your question about whether it can be a point of friction, it absolutely can be. Anytime you have a two-headed monster, which is what you really have when you have co-founder partners. I've seen businesses where it's become a real problem. In our case, it wasn't, and it was actually one of our secret weapons because we embraced the differences. We knew we were very different people, but it also meant that we brought different perspectives. And so we would push and pull and challenge each other's thinking, usually come out the other end with a better plan than what either one of us would have come up with individually. So, and I think a lot of it is just how the partners deal with the inherent differences. But I didn't want a partner who was exactly like me. That adds no value. I needed a partner that covered up my weaknesses, not mirrored my strengths.
Mm-hmm. So prior to Popchips, you helped Costco play a pivotal role in launching their retail gas business. I'm curious if this experience, how it helped you moving forward with a lot of your, future business endeavors.
Well, I was really blessed in that Costco is a very entrepreneurial company, and I was in a group that was a bit of a skunk works for Costco and looking at evaluating new businesses and that Costco gets into, a lot of which we never got into and, recommended we not pursue, but some of them we did. And the gas station was one of them, but there were others, whether it was Costco services division I started or some other things. And what it really taught me was in every case, I was being thrown into something I had absolutely no background in. And so it taught me to have a healthy respect for what I didn't know, but also how to try to get to the bottom of what I needed to know, whether it was through something I could research myself, interviewing industry experts, what have you. It, I think, gave me kind of an unplanned boot camp and training, if you will, for launching new business initiatives.
Does it surprise you to, now not being with Costco, how many different industries and products and service verticals Costco has gone into and disrupted, or knowing what you know and how entrepreneurial they are, it's not surprising at all?
It's really not surprising to me at all, because Costco's whole mindset was, and continues to be, disrupting anytime they can provide value to their members or improve quality, and they're not afraid to fail, and they fail all the time, and they just do it in a very small way. So they've tested out being in the health club business, the furniture business, even insurance, all kinds of crazy things that most people never hear about. And if it doesn't work, they say it didn't work, and they embrace that. And then when it does work, they run with it. And it's a really rare entrepreneurial spirit to have in such a very large company nowadays.
Mm-hmm. So Pat, I want to be respectful of your time. I have three final questions. Firstly, what are some of your favorite snack products or brands on the market right now, aside from Popchips?
I'd say, one of my favorite snacks is a brand called Beanfields that I love to snack on. It's plant-based. It uses beans, and so it has a lot of protein and fiber. And they've developed a lot of great flavor profiles and even new form factors like vegan cracklins, which are amazing that they just launched. And so there's a number of these better for you snacks that have kind of evolved from where Popchips was, which was what I call the absence of bad, to more the presence of good. And it's fun to see the industry evolving.
Along the way, did you have any mentors or role models in business that you look up to?
Absolutely. I've been blessed with a number of them, but the one that stands out the most is Costco's co-founder and original CEO, Jim Senegal. Jim taught me all kinds of things, from the importance of taking care of your people, where he paid Costco employees the highest wages in retail, and in return got the highest productivity in retail. He also showed me that, relentless attention to quality and customer service pays long-term dividends. And at the time, I had just come out of Wall Street, where all those were very foreign concepts at the time. but I've carried them with me ever since.
So along that way, you're someone who has lived and breathed food all day, every day. At times, the business of food has gotten in the way of personal enjoyment. What's your favorite way to reconnect with food on a personal level?
Strangely, I would say travel, because by traveling in different cities and different countries, you see flavor trends and you see how different food is impacted by different things like soil and weather. Trust me, a tomato in Italy tastes very different from a tomato grown in California. Everything from the soil and the water, and then seeing different flavor mashups that you can then translate to new food products. I find really not only exciting, but inspiring.
Pat Turpin is the co-founder of Popchips and now a senior advisor and board member to CPG companies. Pat, I appreciate you taking the time to join Food for Thought today.
Thanks, Mike. Great talking to you.
Appreciate it.